Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hammad. I'm the HPAT tutor here at Grinds 360, and today's our first day of starting our HPAT course. And starting kind of the journey today will be very much some basics, some more complicated stuff, and hopefully after today, you guys will all have a fairly decent sense of kind of what the HPAT is, how you study for it, and roughly how to structure the next kind of 5-ish months to give yourself the best chance of getting in. Okay. What you can see now on your screen is obviously you've got me and you've got the notes in the background, okay? Most of this class will kind of be in this format of, you'll be seeing me, but we'll be working mostly off the notes. The odd time I might have a look at the whiteboard, okay? But generally speaking, we're gonna try and stick to the notes. The main reason for that is some of the stuff, it's just more obvious to go through with you guys if it's actually on the notes themselves. It might get a bit distracting at times, especially if we have to go through questions, which we will at the end of today, and then as we kind of progress closer to the exam, we go through more and more questions. So before we get started properly, we're going to do a little bit of an unusual thing, and that is that in the chat box, I put in a load of questions, okay? The absolutely best thing about Grinds 360 and this kind of course for you guys, or these classes, is that you can take them from the comfort of your own home. You can look at them now, today in September, or in October, November, December. The only bad thing, or the only kind of slight con, is that I can't, obviously this is online, I can't see you guys. I don't really know precisely who I'm speaking to, okay? So the idea behind these questions at the start is just for me to get a sense of who you guys are in the audience, who I'm speaking to, because you'll get a sense as we progress through today, but the HPAT's very different than most normal kind of courses, or it's not really like a Leaving Cert subject. I'll talk a lot about why that is. And it's really important that I kind of get a sense of who I'm talking to, and that way I can kind of tailor what I say to actually like make it make sense. Okay, so if you can go straight to the chat function or the chat box, and I think there's about 6 questions. The first couple are like, are you 5th or 6th year? Are you from, basically like, where are you in Ireland? In other words, like, are you from Dublin or outside Dublin? Do you know anybody else who's doing the HPAT? And then a couple questions on this thing called mid-entry. You can just fire them in as soon as you can, okay? And then once we have some of those answers, I'll have a look and then we'll get stuck in, okay? So I appreciate that, guys. Just have a look at the chat, just put in, you can put it all in one massive answer, and it just gives me the best chance of actually kind of getting to know you guys a little bit better. And then conversely, if you guys have any questions for me, you can put them in and we'll talk about that. And then once we get that out of the way, we'll get stuck into the kind of meat of the notes today. Is that all right? So if you can do that for a second, I'll have a look at a couple of the questions you guys have already said. Okay, so just keep coming, just keep bringing them in. To kind of keep things nice and efficient, I'll kind of yap on a little bit while you guys are doing that. It shouldn't take you too long. It should take you about like 25, 30 seconds or something. I've tried to keep them nice and short. So today's topic is, what is the HPAT and how do you study for it, okay? As I said, it'll start off basic. You'll notice around about, I'd say about 35 minutes into today, the class will take a bit of a step up, okay? You will notice that the intensity will increase, and I don't have a slide in here today that's like, today we're doing this, a week from now we're doing this, a week from now we're doing that. And the main reason for that, guys, is I do try and make these classes as interactive as possible. Obviously, if it's online, it's slightly different. And I'll tell you kind of what type of experience I have from teaching HPAT in the past and who exactly I am. And that's coming in about a slide or two. But the other thing is, if you guys want certain things, you guys have access to the HPAT tutors here, myself and John. Well, certainly to me today, you have it through the chat. So you can tell us what you'd like us to give you, basically. So if you guys really find that the section 1 teaching is really helpful, then you can tell us. And I can adjust the course to make sure we cover enough, like section 2 and 3, but I can just give you more section 1 if that's what you want, okay? So that's why we don't have like a master plan here in the notes, okay? But some basic stuff, like the previous version of this course that I delivered was in person. So obviously I have to have the, like, please turn your phones off, all that stuff. The reason I've kept it in is because I'd like you guys to practice focusing, essentially. It'll be a big part of when we get on to later today about kind of how do you structure your study, big questions like this. A big part of that is being able to focus and, lock in, essentially. So I think it's a good habit, even if you're at home, you're on at least one screen, your laptop, computer or something, try and keep your phone off, if for no other reason, just to preserve your attention span, okay? I'm big on interactive learning. I will try and make these as interactive and engaging as possible. There is a little bit of a learning curve that'll have to happen for all of us, and that's of course including me, because this is my first time doing this. So I will try and get a sense of the type of, how to make this interactive, how to pause for long enough to let you guys either think about the questions I'm asking or put it into the chat. I've noticed lots of you have been really active in there. If anyone's just joined, I was just saying I put a load of questions into the chat box that I'd love you guys to answer, just so I can get a better sense of who I'm talking to and kind of who our kind of HPAT clientele or HPAT students are. Okay, so it'll only take a few minutes, or like half a minute, I'd say. There's 6 questions. They're pretty basic. Okay, so there'll be a learning curve, but I do expect you guys to participate. I do expect you guys to engage, and crucially, I do not give a shit if you get stuff right. Okay, it's really not a concern of mine, especially not whatever it is, September 20th. Okay, I don't care if you get stuff right. What I do care is that you try. Okay, in my experience, the best kind of predictor of how well you do, generally speaking, is how well you try, not actually whether you get stuff right at the start. And we'll talk about why that's true in a moment. On the board behind me is a whole crack about how to use these classes. We're going to talk about that here in a second. Before we do that, though, you might be thinking, it's been 7 minutes. Who the hell is this guy? So my name is Hammad. I'm a 4th year medical student in Trinity. I did my leaving cert in 2021. You can see there I got 590. I got 177 in my HPAT at the time. It was a pretty good result. But you might remember that the grade inflation that year was pretty crazy. So we actually I ended up missing medicine by 2 points, basically. So I did all right in my leaving cert, did pretty well in the HPAT, but still fell short. So I had to repeat the HPAT the following year and try and figure out, like, okay, worked really hard. I did pretty well, right? 177 is a great result. If you guys get 590 and 177, as you'll find out later on in this class, you will get definitely RCSI Cork and Galway. So you can kind of think, it's a pretty good result. I was under the impression for most of the summer I'd be grand. Ended up not getting it. That's quite devastating mentally and emotionally. And then ended up repeating the HPAT, did much better, as you can see there, got the 97th percentile, and I've taught HPAT since. I've taught online and in-person private grinds, and then last year I taught a HPAT course in the Institute for similar duration as this, 12 weeks, or 12 to 15 weeks basically. And the only difference really, the notes are slightly different, and crucially, obviously, the delivery is different. That was in person, this is online, okay? And these notes, or my whole teaching philosophy, for lack of a better word, can pretty simply be summarized as follows. Okay, it's based on 2 things. It's really pretty basic. The first one, I'm teaching the version of myself that existed when I did the HPAT the first time and tried really hard and fell short, and teaching the second version of myself to avoid all the pain and difficulty, particularly mentally, I'm talking about here, mentally and emotionally, that I put myself through, frankly, because I didn't know any better. So it's really informed by my own personal experiences. That will come through in these classes because I will tell you very plainly how I studied, how I felt, how it felt when days were good, how it felt when days were bad, and there's a fair combination of both with this exam. And also then, based on teaching, like I've probably taught well over 200 students at this stage, seeing what works for students, what doesn't, and trying to tailor the classes, again, with your feedback, but also with feedback I've got previously, to give you guys as much of the stuff that actually helps, that you guys respond well to, and less of the shite, basically, that you guys will switch off on. Okay. If we go back to just the question on the board for a second, how to use these classes? Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of information. I'm a HPAT tutor. I'm responsible for making these notes. These classes will run for about 13 weeks. There'll be a couple extra bits on top of those 13 weeks, workshops, master classes, that type of thing. But for 13 weeks, you're going to be here. Okay, I want you guys to think, what is the best way to use these classes, in your opinion? So I just want you can just write 3 lines. I'll give you about a minute. Just think on a copy in front of you, beside you. What's the best way to use these classes, do you think, in your opinion? And I'll have a look at the chat, and then we'll, you don't have to tell me. I'm going to have a look at what you guys answered previously. And all I want you guys to think is, what's the best way to use these classes? Okay, so just 1 minute. Think about that, and then we'll start again. Okay, well, first of all, thank you for participating in the chat. Anyone who's joined again, the notes are in the chat, by the way, as well. So you don't really need them for today. In future, I'll try and make sure you guys have access to the notes before you show up to class. It might be better off that way. The main thing I want you guys to take from today, essentially, is I want you to feel prepared. You know what the HPAT is. You kind of have a solid frame of reference for like what exactly they're testing, what they're not testing, because there's a lot of either misinformation or just frankly incorrect information. Also, some of you who have found, particularly those who may know friends of friends or older brothers of friends and all this jazz, there's a lot of bullshit information about the HPAT. Somebody who hasn't got it, who's a bit sore over that, then tells everybody it's a bullshit exam, they test nothing, etc. Some truth to that, but not entirely. So the goal is to give you guys some nice, solid, objective information. I'll be very clear when I'm giving you guys objective things, so i.e. things that are true, and subjective, i.e. my opinion. The reason why talking about how to use these classes is so important, okay, is because these classes are not designed to replace MedEntry. That's the most important thing you guys need to get into your head. I'm not trying to like be a one-man MedEntry, essentially. We're going to talk about it in about 10 minutes time, but really my number one HPAT advice is like get MedEntry. Okay, there are other things you can get that are cheaper or slightly different, but generally speaking, I say get MedEntry. Okay, so the first thing you guys need to get straight in your head, how to use these classes. Okay, it's essentially, to use kind of medical terminology, we'll say, you know, it's a supportive therapy. Okay, or you can think about it as, you know, supplemental or additional. Okay, so you guys coming here will be helpful, but it won't be the only reason you do well. You will do well because you work hard and you use MedEntry properly. The good thing for you guys is that by coming here, I can help guide you guys into the right direction, more or less. Okay. The other thing, how to use these classes, please do what I say. I will hopefully prove to you guys I'm worthy of your time and respect, but nothing I really say makes any difference to you guys if you don't actually do the work. And that's really important. We're going to talk about what makes this exam so hard. And a huge part of that is the competition is really good. So me telling you guys, do this, do this, do this, if you decide just to kind of ignore that or not do it, likely, generally speaking, that bill will come due. Not today, not tomorrow, but about a week before the exam in February, when you know you're undercooked, but you have to do the test anyways. Okay? What am I trying to do when I'm making these notes? Like what is in my brain about my master plan? Essentially, it's to do these two things, okay? I want you guys to be able to answer the questions with the right techniques and tactics and tips and strategies and all that stuff, okay? Those of you who've done the exams, about at least well over half of you have MedEntry, I would say. So you guys are familiar with, let's say, what pick the middle is. If you are familiar with what pick the middle is, you'll know mapping is really important. I want to make sure you guys understand how to map and why you map and when you map and how to map properly. Okay, if that means nothing to you, do not worry. It's very early anyways. You don't need to know what mapping is. We'll talk actually about section 3 in a second. But more importantly is the second bullet point, okay? Prepare and equip you with the skills and techniques required to optimize your performance and deal with the pressure of performing in this exam. Feedback from students is that second bullet point is the strongest part of these classes. So to kind of spoil what's coming in the next hour, you're going to be up against really strong students. The only people who bother with this exam are the ones who are quite excellent. Okay, the baseline, i.e. the most aggressively average HPAT student, is in the top like 10% of students in this country. Okay, so it means that you're all really hardworking, you're all good at doing your homework on time, you've all been a pleasure to teach since 4th class, okay? None of that shit matters anymore because the baseline resets again. And a huge part of performance in this exam then boils down to like mentally, how's your confidence levels? When you realize this exam is basically, it's in February, you get one go. If you do well, class. If you don't, you have to show up next year. Realizing that there's a lot of pressure associated with that. All of you hate doing badly in exams. Most of you feel terrible about yourself if you get an 89 in a test and not 90. And you will wake up the night before this, you will go to sleep the night before this test knowing if you make a balls of the exam in the morning, you won't get undergraduate medicine in Ireland. And that is a lot of pressure. And there's a reason 16 minutes into today I'm bringing up that pressure, because as I said, we'll start off nice and basic, but I'm not going to run or hide from the, frankly, harsh realities of this exam, because only after we accept the stakes, only after we accept, like, look, this is a tough exam, the only people who do this exam are really good students, only then can you really deal with the stresses and like the trials and tribulations of this test properly. Only after that can you do any of that. Okay? It's also the thing that when I get feedback from students after I teach them, either in that group class I was talking about or privately, it is, generally speaking, especially in the students who do the best, it is the thing that they say helps them the most, the mindset stuff. The amount of students who get 99, 100, 96, 95, and if I ask them, like, what did you find most helpful? Almost universally, they say mindset stuff. And the reason, if we go back to what I was saying about spoiling the next hour, is that your reward, essentially, this is kind of spoiling like 8 weeks of work here, but your reward for working hard in this exam and working hard on med entry or whatever prep materials you use is that this exam will eventually boil down to mentality, because you'll all roughly, let's say the people who are not terrible at the HPAT, you're all roughly close together. So the only actual differentiating factor starts to become mindset, because you're all going to, hammer through questions. You're all going to do practice exams. You'll all put in the work is what I'm saying. And so because you're in a cohort of people who will all do that, the only thing that can really make a difference becomes mindset, mentality, your confidence, self-talk, stuff like that. Okay? Does that make sense? Before we keep going, just to make sure nothing terrible has happened in the last 10 minutes, can you all hear me okay? Is the audio clear and you can see the board and the slides and stuff like that? Can somebody just put in yes into the chat so I can make sure we don't need to do a emergency intervention very quickly? You can all hear me okay? Perfect. Thank you, Daniel. Class. Hopefully, can I get one more person just so that it's not just Daniel who has amazing internet? All right, we'll wait 1 second. Perfect. Thank you. So, what is the HPAT? Nice, handy, simple question. All this stuff is taken from an online resource called the HPAT Ireland Test Taker Booklet. It's not that crucially important, okay? You don't absolutely have to read through it now, but it's worth going through, and the stuff that they say, it does really matter, okay? So if we scroll down here, I've highlighted the stuff that's important. What you guys have in the chat is a plain version of these notes. I've highlighted some important stuff. I'll upload and make sure you guys have access to the kind of more untidy but kind of highlighted versions of these notes, and that'll be the same after every class. Okay, so I'll make sure you guys have access to that. So what do the letters stand for? Health Professionals Admissions Test. It's developed by these guys called ACER. I'm reading at the top here. I'm starting off over here, okay? ACER, that doesn't really matter. They make lots of exams. HPAT is one of their exams. The only thing that this actually has significance for you is you'll get emails at really random times, because you'll get them at 3 a.m. Irish time, because it's people in Australia working, okay? Otherwise, this doesn't make much difference to you guys. It's a 2.5 hour test. It has 3 sections. Each section is separately timed, and there's no rest between sections. That means if you're really good at section 1, you can't finish section 1 fast and then spend extra time on section 2. Okay, it's 2.5 hours. The questions are MCQ, so multiple choice, and it's either 4 or 5 options. It's usually 4 options in sections 1 and 2, and then 5 options in section 3. And each question has only 1 correct response. This may seem like absolutely basic ass stuff to you guys, but trust me, when we get deep into section 2, like theory or strategy, all that stuff, this becomes really, really important, okay? There's 3 sections. Section 1, there's 4 sections, but really we don't need to worry too much. Well, you guys don't need to worry too much about this because you're undergraduate applicants, okay? And this is UL for speech and language therapy. It's not actually for undergrad medicine. So section 1 is logical reasoning, problem solving, and data interpretation. Okay, I'm going to repeat myself again later, but this is worth 40%. Okay, section 2 is interpersonal understanding, so understanding people, showing empathy, that kind of stuff. Also worth 40%. Section 3 is worth nonverbal reasoning. I mentioned pick the middle earlier. So pick the middle, next in sequence or series, and missing segment. That's worth 20%. Okay, and 1, 2, and 3, this is the order that they happen in. Okay, we'll talk about timing and weighting, and well, we've already talked about weighting, but timing and strategies and stuff But what I really want you guys to get, at least out of the start today, is just really basic, simple stuff that you're really clear on so that it doesn't trip you up again. Okay? Some key information. So it's an online MCQ exam and it's proctored. Proctored just means, basically just means it's a digital invigilator. Okay? Invigilators are the guys who are walking up and down your exam hall making sure you're not cheating. So it means that it's a digital invigilator. It means that, they're making sure you're not Googling words in section 2. They're making sure you're not asking ChatGPT every question. They're making sure somebody else isn't answering the questions for you. Okay. In other words, it's just like making it fair. Okay. This is the first kind of complicated thing we're about to get. Okay. So your result is giving us a percentile, not a percentage. And this makes relative performance really important. Why would this matter? I've already kind of spoiled this for you guys, but can someone in the chat, can a few of you just say, why do you think it matters? Why, this is different to the leaving cert. It's not like you got X% of questions correct, right? It's about percentile. Can someone explain to me in the chat why this is important? Why am I stopping here to focus on this, right? So I want you all to think, why does it matter? And again, I've kind of already told you, but just put it in the chat so that I know you guys are listening. And also, to anyone asking questions, I will, at the end, try and go through as many as I can. Okay, so why is the fact that it's a percentile exam so significant? Okay, we got one answer. I'll wait for a couple more to come through. Also, while I'm doing this, can somebody just confirm that I'm speaking at an okay rate? It's not too fast or the accent isn't too thick, that I'm making sense, because obviously I won't figure that out unless someone tells me. So if that's a problem for anybody, can someone just tell me, like, audio is fine, speed is fine? That'll be appreciated. Okay, while you guys are doing that, Diana said, you're compared to everyone else. And Fionn said, percentile is done on the basis of how everyone did, not just you individually. Because it depends on how well you did compared to other applicants rather than how many you got correct. So you're all bang on, basically, okay? You will all roughly be familiar with, a curve, or if you're not familiar, you will become familiar with a curve that, I'm going to make a balls of this now, but looks something like this, okay? And that's your standard distribution curve, okay? And it's like, this is test results, okay? So this is like people down here. This is people over here and percent in exam on the bottom. Forgive this crude diagram. Basically, pretty much everyone over here completely cooked, no chance. Okay, that's about half of people, by the way. People in, let's say, here, depending on their leaving cert, maybe. These guys completely grand. Okay, this obviously isn't the greatest diagram in the world. My point is to show you, think about how smart or how good or how many points in the leaving cert some fella over here is getting. Like, that guy's still probably getting like 550 or 560, right? You'll meet people who get 625 and don't even crack the 50th percentile. So I know personally people who are in that category, somebody who got 725 and got 50. So the point, or the problem with this, guys, is because the quality of students who are doing this test is so, because the quality of the students is so good, it makes it really hard for you guys to do well enough. Yeah, that is essentially the truth. So it means that, yes, you might keep the strategies and techniques you're used to using that are used to working for you, and that won't really matter, because if you just perform at whatever like normal level, and you don't think too much about making things efficient and having good mindset and all this stuff, so is everyone else will be similarly good, and therefore you won't distinguish yourself. And because it's not like, oh, there's no practice exams for this test, right? It's a bit of a spoiler coming, but there's no practice exams. Practice exam meaning past papers. There's no past papers. They don't tell you what comes up. Everything you hear about, like, oh, last year there was a lot of data interpretation, or I think last year there was a lot of problem solving in maths, people said. It's all anecdotal. We don't even know that's true. We don't even know if they're going to do the same thing like this year for you guys, right? So because of this, because the combination of unknowns on what comes up, and because you have to realize you're competing against everybody else in a way that technically you are for the leaving cert, but like not really. because the competition isn't as stiff. It means that the reason you have to push yourself so hard, the reason why I'm going to expect you guys to work hard from around about 12:27 on the 20th of September 2025 is because if you have a look at the chat, and it's very good, I appreciate all of you for answering. Like some people have, like, I don't think anybody in the chat said it, but like, so I've met people who've been studying for the HPAT since TY. I had a mother reach out to me in March, just gone, asking for weekly grinds for her son in third year. Hadn't even set his junior cert, and I told her, like, absolutely not. But it just gives you a sense, like, people are thinking about this exam for a long time. Now, doing the HPAT in TY in third year is absolute ridiculous idea in my opinion. It does not work at all. But my point is, if they're working that hard, if they're starting it that early, you've got to think, okay, I've really got to make sure I'm on the ball. I've got to make sure I'm sharp. I've got to make sure that I'm applying myself properly. Because if you don't, the only time you will definitely know for sure you've made a balls of the exam is a morning by like the 28th of June at like 6 in the morning, when you realize you've, the exam's like 50%, you've no chance of getting in, okay? There's 3 sections, with section 1 and 2 worth 40% and section 3 worth 20%. Why might this matter? Okay, I want you guys to think about that for a second. Well, obviously, section 1 and 2 are more important. But what I want you to think more so is, how does this affect your study? Right, we're going to come to this later, but the idea is that if section 1 and 2 are worth 40% and section 3 is worth 20%, you need to weigh your study accordingly to put as much effort into sections 1 and 2 as you can. Obviously, don't neglect section 3, but what often happens, a common pitfall, and this is not accidental by Acer, i.e. the guys making the exam, is that when you do section 3, and if I pick a random person, I promise this is completely random, someone said 6th year Dublin, I got med entry this month, I've done 1 full mock and been doing practice exams. That person probably is terrible at section 3, okay? Because probably everyone in this Zoom is terrible at section 3. And it is really hard for a high achieving student to accept emotionally, whatever about intellectually, emotionally, it is hard to accept that you actually tried hard on a test and got like 6 out of 30, or you got the 20th percentile, okay? So it is really hard to deal with that emotionally. However, if you overcompensate and you then spend half of your time on section 3 because you can only really remember how shite you were, you will eventually hurt your section 1 and 2, because an amazing section 1 will be enough to compensate for an okay section 3, but an amazing section 3 will not be enough to compensate for an okay section 1. Does that make sense? You need to be good at sections 1 and 2. I skipped past going through my statement of results, okay? Because most of this, it's not really that relevant. To break it down very simply, this is your percentile over here. I'm going to talk a lot about percentile because it's the best indicator. This is your score. This is what counts on your CAO, okay? So what CAO, your CAO points, what CAO cares about, we'll call it, okay? Your score is linked to your percentile, but your percentile is not always like somebody else could have gotten 97 percentile on this exam and would have had a score of like 195. Okay, so you need to focus more on percentile than score, because the score is dependent on how you've done in sections 1, 2, and 3, and it changes, and depending on like how overall people did. Somebody like this year, for instance, I think a student of mine, she got the 95th percentile, which is just under me for 97, but her score was like 186. How that works, not entirely sure. I've met people, I know a friend of mine, she got the 99th percentile and she got 211. Another friend of mine, he got 211, but he got the 100th percentile. So, there's a lot of variation. For your purposes, just care about the percentile, okay? The reason why I've gone back to this, just to show you very quickly, this is a score for section 1, score for section 2, score for section 3. How do they make the score? I don't know. It's not really worth worrying about. Just do your best, basically. There's a formula, but there's a lot of variation and variables we don't know how to account for, i.e. not every question in this exam even counts at all. Not every question counts equally, because some questions are testers, some questions are intentionally hard just to kind of fuck with your head, basically. I don't even know if this 82 means I got like the 82nd percentile. I don't know. Why I don't know is because I've met people, and you'll see people who get like 108 in a section or 102. So it can't possibly be percentile because you can't get the 102nd percentile. So for the purposes of like your preparation, just focus on percentile. It keeps things simple. Aim for, we're going to talk about it later, but roughly speaking, aim for the 90th percentile is what I'd suggest. Okay, is that, sorry. Apologies. All right, is that clear? Hopefully it is. We go back. So this is kind of basic stuff. We're going to fly through the next 5 or 6 slides, and then we'll take a break for probably 5 minutes, and then we'll come back. Where can you do this? Like, where can you study medicine? Simple. Trinity, UCD, RCSI, they're all in Dublin. Galway and Cork, they're out west and south. And then there is, like, I've put it in now undergraduate program for medicine. The reason why I put a question mark is, like, I'm not saying it's not going to exist. I have faith it will exist. They haven't really, I tried to find like solid information from like the University of Limerick or the School of Medicine. Couldn't really find anything. Could only find reports that said, you know, there is funding for it. It will kick in 2026, which is your year. Or at least it's the 6th year's year. And they say that it's about 30 students. The reason why, quite frankly, unless you live in Limerick, I don't think this makes any difference to any of you, is there's about 500 places for medicine in Ireland. And as we're about to talk about, there's people who get there's people who would have got 728, and if that makes no sense to you, that's okay. I'm going to explain what that means in a second. But who got 728 and missed out because it was random selection. So in other words, they got 728 and another guy got 728, but because person B's got picked in the lottery, he got in, and your one who got 728 as well, well, he hasn't got it. So because there's so much competition, I really don't think 30 students is going to move this in any direction, in any meaningful way. Maybe by a point, maximum 2, but the fact that there's an undergraduate program in Limerick will not make, in my opinion, I could be wrong, don't think it'll make a massive difference to like Trinity and UCD's points. Again, maybe by 1, if that. Okay. There's 42 questions in section 1, 42 questions in section 2, and 30 questions in section 3. And then there's different times. This is really important, okay? Because timing will be very important. Again, you guys don't need to worry about that because you're not a UL applicant, because that's just for the occupational therapy and SLT that I mentioned earlier. So this matters because if we go down, timing is really important. I've given you some rough timing. If you've never considered timing as an important variable, or you've absolutely no clue what the hell the HPAT test, just please try and follow these timing rules, okay? I've done it so that you know how long to spend per 10 questions. There are other methods you can use. When we go further into section 1 and 2 and 3 in the next few weeks, I will give more detail and kind of more fine tuning. But timing is really important. I'll come back to why it's really important in about 10 minutes or so, but it's crucial. Structure is really important. Remember, if you go into this exam and wing it, your natural talent or the fact that you've been kind of sharp your whole life will not matter. You will get completely killed by people who are equally talented but have a plan. So it's really important. Do not be arrogant here. Follow a timing method until you are so confident that your results are so absolutely unimpeachable that you can do whatever you want. At which point, you have my permission to do whatever you want, i.e. when you start getting like consecutive 99s in your exams. Until then, please follow a timing method. There's some other detail here. With practice, you'll get better, obviously. We're going to talk the specifics of like this, don't micromanage each question. Why that's important is essentially like the reason we do it in 10 minutes is not every question will take as much time. So if you balance it out over 10 minutes or 10 questions, i.e. 14 minutes, you should be able to catch up. But if you just do it per question, sometimes you need a bit more extra time to do like the first of a set of 3 so that you can catch up on the second and third question, if that makes sense. So you'll have one stem and it'll apply to 2 or 3 questions. So in that case, if you timed yourself based only on like an individual question, you'd be finishing too fast on the first one. And it is actually, generally speaking, just better to spend more time on that first question so that the second, third, and fourth questions related to the first stem are a bit easier for you. Okay, again, if that doesn't make much sense to you, that's okay. It will make sense. If not by the end of class, but certainly then certainly by the end of next week. Okay. I've been talking a lot about points, and some of you may never have understood or have ever encountered how the points calculation works. The really important thing you guys need to get is, the really important thing you guys need to cop onto is this part here, okay? So after 550, every 5 points counts as 1 point. It means that if you get 625 for medicine, that counts as 565. There's a little bit of, I'm going to call it fine print, that I am going to say because I think it's worth pointing out. Nobody really knows what the Department of Education are going to do in any given moment, okay? They've said that they're going to change the weighting of the HPAT, and if I understand it correctly, and more importantly, if they've communicated it correctly, that means they're going to make the Leaving Cert more important, okay? So I'm going to say NB just is Latin for important, okay? So for next year, i.e. not this HPAT, the one coming, so HPAT, what would that be, 27. I think that year they will either make a balls of the HPAT or they will intentionally make it so that you just really need a strong Leaving Cert to get in. And why that's important for you guys is because I'm going to tell you later on, it's really hard to get into medicine. From a planning and emotional perspective, think of this as really like a 2-year process. That I wouldn't make any major life decisions until you've tried the HPAT twice. And by major life decisions, I mean going to an inferior university that you'd be less happy with, but at least it's medicine. If you want to do that, do it. Just do it after you've done the HPAT twice. So that means that a lot of you should have this in the back of your head, like you need a strong Leaving Cert, because what you don't want is a Leaving Cert that is like, let's say 570, good Leaving Cert. But if they change the points and what they've said to do, and you can read on the Irish Times, they basically said that they're going to make the HPAT, instead of out of 300, they're going to make it out of 150, okay? And if they do that, then that makes, and they're going to get rid of this after 550, every 5 points is 1 point, which just means that like it's going to become a case of you need to do really well to get in. And you guys need to have one eye on that, thinking you need to get close to 600. So I've put in here, you should all be aiming for 601 and 90th percentile. The only kind of exception to this is if you qualify for DARE or HERE, in which case, you can bring those down a little bit because you have a bit more leeway or a bit more leeway. But everybody else, I quite frankly, I try to be understanding. I really don't give a shit what your reason is for why you can't get to 601 and 90. It is unacceptable. Just find a way to get there. And the reason for this is quite simple. If you aim for 740, even if you fall short by a couple percentiles, one H1 becomes a H2, you will still end up at like 731, 732. You'll still get Galway, Cork, probably RCSI. Okay, if you get 740, i.e. if you get 601 and 90, you'll definitely get Trinity and UCD, whichever one, whatever you have first, basically. So it's the worst thing for me as a tutor, and it's, I'm sure, as I know very well, it's terrible as a student when you get really close, but you don't quite make it, okay? And so anything you can do to just make sure you're on the other side of that you just about qualify, is what you need to do. Like I had one student this year and he got pretty good HPAT. I think he got 79th percentile or 80th percentile or something. And then he was expecting a H1 in biology. He got a H2. He got like an 87 or something. And he missed Galway by 2 points, basically because of that. Okay. So aim high enough that even if you fall a little bit short, you're still clear. Because the HPAT does not carry over. So if you do the HPAT in 2026, that'll only last like for that September. As soon as that September goes, the HPAT's in the wind, you have to do it again. So just keep this in mind. Like I said, aim high so that you don't have all that disappointment when it comes to the results on the offers coming out. I put in what they changed to 2025. They haven't like confirmed this, as in we're just finished round 2, I think. So round 3 and 4 and all that stuff is still to come. And as you can see, every single year it is kind of the same crack. For a reason X, the points will change. Okay, I hear it all the time. I have had the same approach since the last 3 years, basically. The points may change. I have no idea. Okay, I really don't think anybody has any idea. I would act as if they will not change at all. So from a planning perspective, from a target perspective, I would just assume the points are going to stay the same. Because frankly, unless another pandemic happens, which, God forbid, it's only going to move by 1 or 2 points in either direction, right? You can convince me both ways. You can convince me that 30 more points will mean everything drops down by 2. And I'd say, like, okay, I wouldn't push back hard on that. You could tell me that 30 more points, 30 more places mean like 200 more people are going to do this exam. And if more people do it, then all of a sudden the competition is higher. Therefore, it's like you're still going to have super competitive situation. From a planning perspective, just assume the points are going to stay the same, is my recommendation. It says here you have to get 480, like it's the minimum entry criteria. It is literally impossible to get 480 and get into medicine. So like, really you definitely need to be getting over 550. That is the floor of an acceptable HPAT. I had a student who did very well in her HPAT. She had the 85th percentile. So from a HPAT tutor's perspective, I was thinking, okay, happy out, she'll get RCSI probably. And she ended up getting 540 in her leaving cert. So she had a great HPAT. She worked really hard for it. All of a sudden a H1 becomes a H3. All of a sudden her German's not as good as she thought. Now I haven't spoken to her since, but she went from, I think when the result comes back to, geez, you might get RCSI, to I think she's in Italy at the moment doing medicine. Maybe like that's all for the best, but from a getting into undergraduate medicine in Ireland perspective, make sure you're getting solid leaving cert points. It's much easier to do better, i.e. like it's much easier in my opinion to go from like 570 to 601 than it is to go from the 82nd to the 90th percentile. Okay, and the reasons we've talked about that is we've already spoken about that. Now, what constitutes a good score? This slide, it's kind of bullshit, to be honest. There's a lot of detail here. You don't really need to care about, frankly, any of this. If we go back to my terrible drawing earlier that I had for you guys. Okay, my pencil's not working. If we go back up here, I drew a very terrible standard distribution graph, okay? And if you have a look down here, we have what looks like a standard distribution graph. And you can see quite clearly that there's loads of people in the middle and not too many people, on the outside. Right, we can draw lines kind of roughly here. That's most people. And again, you can use that rough thing. Everyone kind of, basically, if you don't, I would say basically everything this way, I would describe as having no chance. Pretty much everything. I'll change that slightly. I would say maybe anything less than 160, you've basically no shot, more or less. You might get lucky and you'll get it, but generally speaking, you're not going to. That's a lot of people I've just immediately disregarded. Okay, it's a tough exam. It's a tough exam. It's very unforgiving, and the examiner cares about turning out good doctors. They do not give a shit about who they kind of kick to the wayside. You have to realize this. The reason I'm not pulling any punches today is because you do not get very far in this test if you run from the stakes, basically. I want you guys to be prepared to run toward the smoke, not away from the smoke, okay? There's pressure with this test. It's hard. You'll try really hard, and unfortunately, you just might not do well enough. That is a reality that is true right now, today. It is a reality that has been true for every single cohort of students who have ever sat this exam. And the key for you to improve is to accept that those are the stakes, accept that those are the terms and conditions, and then keep going anyways. Because if you accept that, okay, look, this is kind of scary, fine, you can deal with the pressure. If you don't, which is essentially what I did, I used to tell myself, I'll just keep working hard. And I'm talking about the first time I attempted the HPAT. Like, I'll just keep working hard and I'll do so much work, it'll just be impossible that I won't do well enough. Like, I will just be so hardworking, I will get it. And then I didn't get it. And I had the worst 6 weeks of my life when I was supposed to have a great time starting college. Okay, so you have to accept that the stakes of this test are such that you might try really hard and it just might not be enough. But once you accept that, then that kind of gives you a bit of, it's empowering to accept that these are the stakes, and then it just becomes a case of, okay, what do I have to do? I know this is in front of me, what do I have to do? The absolute minimum really is 165. Technically with 160 you might get in, but 165, and I've put here 565s, this is, this is basically 625, right, isn't it? Because it's 550 plus 15 x5. That gets you Galway, definitely, and maybe Cork. So really the number is 80th percentile. That's the minimum. If you want to stay in Dublin, you need kind of 80. or presuming you want to get to Dublin, sorry, and 90 is what you want, so that no matter what you put first, you'll get. Okay, this is basically the same information. The only thing I want to show you here, look how steep this curve is. It is a straight line, basically. There is so many people here on this graph. Okay, so from, if we take a random point, let's say here, and a random point, let's say there, literally everybody in that probably gets bad news when they see that result. And you can see the difference in performance. Like normally you would expect, you know, this to be slightly broader, but it is extremely steep. And again, it's just showing the same thing. This will be important next week when we go through how to go through exams. But basically this means that a guy who gets, let's say, 160 and has essentially no chance, and a guy who gets 170 and has a really strong chance, the difference between those two is probably, there's no data on this, it's probably 2 questions in each section that person A gets wrong, and conversely the person B gets correct. 2 questions in each section, that's about 5%-ish of the exam, you know, give or take. That's like, and that's the difference between not doing medicine or doing medicine. That's the difference between staying in Ireland or going abroad. And you have to be so good, you need to aim at least to be so good that you can get to a level of kind of competence and excellence that no matter how badly you do, you're at least at worst Mr. B. Okay? Does that make sense? Did somebody just respond in the chat to let me know that I have actually made sense in the last like half an hour? Okay, I've just got a question there. To make it clear, it is a terrible idea to start in TY or 3rd year. I don't know how many people do it, but you basically never meet anyone in medicine who started studying for medicine in TY or 3rd year. I'm only doing that to show how people who want medicine, like they know early and they work hard, is my point. Also to say, you know, there's some mad ideas about the HPAT out there as well. Okay, this is not really relevant to you guys at the moment. This is old. The 2026 one hasn't come out yet. But basically, registration opens in November. You sign up. Make sure you do it by January. And then when you register, you have to book a session with the guys who proctor the exam, i.e. the invigilators. Do what they tell you to do, so download the apps. And then the testing window is important. You get to choose your day and the time. Okay, so don't waste that opportunity. Makes sense, but is scary. Well, I appreciate the honesty, but yeah, that's actually exactly the kind of vibe I'm going for, so that's a good sign. It's really important that you guys don't waste the opportunity to pick the day and time. You don't get this chance for any other exam. This actual window looks really big. The reason it looks really big is because it's basically 2 windows, okay? The first window is when you actually do your test. And the second window is like 3 or 4 days after that, where all of the people who have technical issues, all the people who got kicked out, you know, too much noise in the background, the proctor wasn't happy with their camera, whatever, they all get let back into their exam for whatever period of time, and they get to do it again. So you actually, your testing window is about 4 days. It's like a Thursday to Monday. But if you have technical issues, you have another like 5 days to like get whatever work done. Note, this is exactly the time basically all of you will be doing your mocks. Not accidental, okay? And we'll be talking about that. Okay, we're now about 40 minutes in. I realize I left out one key detail at the start, which is my fault. In terms of my plan for the timing of these classes, what I think we'll end up landing on is trying to deliver this class from, and today's a bit of an exception because we have to, I'm getting used to the pace, you guys are getting used to the pace, and crucially, like there's those questions at the start. But roughly, I would say 75 to 90 minutes plus questions at the end, or plus minus questions at the end. And there'll be a 5-minute break coming sometime soon, okay? And then, so just so that, you know, I should have said that at the start, but that's how it'll be. Okay, why do we have the HPAT? What a fabulous question, okay? The stuff in bold will read with a special focus, okay? HPAT Ireland has been designed to assess logical reasoning and problem-solving skills, as well as non-verbal reasoning, and the ability to understand the thoughts, behavior, and or intentions of people. The test has a strong focus on general skills and personal abilities that have been identified as important for a competent health professional. HPAT Ireland is designed to complement academic achievement. It does not test academic knowledge, and it does not require special understanding of any academic discipline. Why am I reading this like we're back in 5th class? Well, this stuff is really, really fucking important, okay? You need to have a clear understanding of what exactly is in the examiner's head when they make you do this god-awful exam, okay? So I'll show you a couple bits that I would say are, particularly of particular importance, let's say, in this test, okay? General skills and personal abilities. That'll become important in a second. They want you to be competent. That's kind of important. And it does not test academic knowledge, okay? You do not need to learn a bunch of stuff off. This is not like the BMAT, i.e. the English UCAT, the English HPAT. They also have a thing called the UCAT. But those tests test science, like they test biology, chemistry knowledge. The HPAT lads, they don't care about that at all. They don't expect you to know a huge amount of any academic discipline. Now, they expect you to know a little bit about like scientific method, what's a hypothesis. Sometimes they might expect you to know what a randomized trial means, what a placebo is, stuff like this. This will take you like 10 minutes. You just have to Google them. It's not that complicated. But this is really important, okay? Because number one, they've just told us it's skill-based. They want to know about skills. Why is that important? Can somebody tell me in the chat, please, which Leaving Cert subjects test skills? So what part of your Leaving Cert exam tests skills? Okay, think about that for a second. And I actually can't wait because we're kind of running behind. Basically none of them, okay? Like your oral technically tests a bit of skill. English paper 1 tests a bit of skill. Pretty much everything else is about memory, okay? If you just do enough factorizing, like you will figure it out eventually. If you do enough simultaneous equations, you will figure it out eventually. You can understand, you could probably get a H1 in biology even if you didn't understand English, if you just learned it off properly. This is completely different. And why is that important? Well, it means if you study like for the HPAT, as you may for the Leaving Cert, you just won't get it. Just like straight up, you will not do well. Why? Because Leaving Cert is generally speaking testing memory and application. The HPAT is testing skills and personal abilities. This is really important, okay? So you guys have been a great audience so far. So we're going to finish on a question and then we'll be gone for 5 minutes and then we'll come back, okay? And the question is the following, okay? What general skills could they be looking for? So I want you to think it's about 2007, 2008. You're in charge of coming up with an exam additional to the Leaving Cert to figure out how can we identify people who are likely to be competent health professionals. What skills would you be examining for? So I want you guys to think about that. Put your answer in the chat at some point over the next 5 minutes. And then we'll pick back up we'll say, it's just gone. We'll pick back up at 12:58, we'll say. Okay? Okay, so we're gonna restart again. It's great to see the chat is extremely active, so that's good. Um, there's like a conversation going around about like how to study and how much time and mocks, and that's all coming. So don't worry, we will discuss that. There's a lot of great answers, a lot of great questions. So first of all, thank you all for like participating. I appreciate that. There's some actually very good answers on what general skills could they be looking for. Unfortunately, there are also some not very good answers. Okay. And the reason why this is important is because we should be kind of clear, like if we're trying to beat this exam, which we are, um, like how should we go about doing that? Okay, and that's really important for you all to get clear in your head. Um, before I start that, there's one person who said something like, "This is a jump scare," or like, "This is quite scary." I know is the first thing. Um, there's kind of two things I want you guys to keep in mind. Number one is that remember I'm teaching this class, so that if somebody picks it up in like November, it's still applicable to them. Hence the intensity of what I'm saying. Number two, um, if I think if I think ahead to maybe 6 months from now, when you guys will be asked for feedback, probably on like how you found this class. If somebody says like they didn't like me or they found me annoying or something like that, it's okay. I can accept that. If somebody ever said that they didn't understand how important the exam was, despite attending my classes, I would be extremely unhappy with myself. Okay. My main goal is to get you guys working and working properly and effectively for this test. And yes, that means scaring you a little bit today. But the whole point of the first class is to kind of set up the second half, which is to give you the answers to the questions you may have in your head about, oh my God, if this exam is so hard, how in the name of, how could I possibly do well? We're going to answer all those questions, okay? What could they be looking for? I'm just going to give you a rough kind of list. This is not exhaustive. There's lots of things they care about, okay? Most notably, in no particular order, okay? If I can get this to, okay, I don't know why this isn't working. Just 1 second. Okay, I'll just say it because this is slowing us down a little bit. What general skills could they be looking for? Empathy, problem solving, dealing well with people, critical thinking, pattern recognition, confidence, composure, humility, all things that are important, okay? Another way of thinking about this is like when you go to a doctor, like what personality traits would you like him or her to have, okay, or them? So that's basically the guys making this exam. It feels like a stupid exam for a lot of your study, but there is at least some merit to what they're trying to do, okay? And the idea is that the HPAT is built to kind of show this, essentially. It's built to test things. So yes, they're kind of testing, can you pick the middle? But really, they're testing a lot more than just pick the middle. Like they want to see, okay, you're just like a bunch of shapes in front of you. This looks really stupid. Like, are you going to give up when you realize your first attempt doesn't work? Well, obviously not. Are you going to lose confidence in yourself the first time things go wrong? Well, obviously not. Except like you will. I saw, the tale of like I got med entry, did an exam, did shit, haven't touched it since. Very common. Imagine if your doctor was like that. That if your doctor comes in, most surgeons start their day at like 7:30. Like if you come in at 7:30, you have a shit like 15 minutes. You're on ward rounds, patient's a bit pissed off, and you're like, right, that's it. We throw it, like the end. I'm not trying anymore. You can't do that, obviously. That's kind of what they have in their mind about what they want to assess. Okay, it's like these personality traits that they believe, and I think probably they're correct, lend themselves to making competent healthcare individuals or healthcare professionals or whatever. Okay. How do you study for the HPAT? Some general principles. Okay, prioritize quality over quantity always. We've talked about it's a skill-based exam. You cannot use the same techniques for the HPAT as you can for the Leaving Cert because the Leaving Cert is memory. HPAT is skill. How do you study for your oral? Speak. Okay. How do you study for the HPAT? Do questions. For those of you, well, pretty much all of you will be good at least some skill. Sport is the most obvious one. Music is another. Cooking, baking, all that stuff. Think about the HPAT as a skill. Think about how you improved at, let's say, football, for instance. And the logic for how you're going to improve at the HPAT will be pretty similar. Okay. For example, if you have ever played any sport at any level, you'll know the easiest way to get better at sport is to play with people who are better than you, right? And you'll just pick up stuff from them. So this is why like group study is very useful. It's also why, by definition, you guys coming here will help because you're learning from somebody who may know more than you. Similarly, if you think about, let's say, cooking, do you become a good chef by doing the same things over and over again until you perfected it? Yeah, absolutely. So do not give me this sort of, oh yeah, I've kind of done a few drills and picked the middle and I think I'm grand. Fuck that. I do not accept that as a reasonable answer. Okay? If people like Gordon Ramsay will cook beef Wellington 1,000 times, and that's how he gets to being the best chef or best chef at beef Wellingtons, then you need to have a similar level of commitment to your, in this case, next in series or cartoons or whatever it is. Okay? Treat it like a skill-based exam. Similarly, if you just do the same things over and over again, if you use the same recipe with the same timings, preheat the oven at the same heat for the same amount of time, is whatever you're going to make likely to be different from the last time? No. So you have to always think about that. How can you adjust your method to to improve, to have different results? Okay. Nothing changes if nothing changes. That's kind of the nice snappy way of describing what I'm talking about here. Remember, I've just told you they're looking for a lot of things past just like, can you pick the middle? I've told you about this. Consistent effort over long periods of time is what you're aiming for. If you miss one day, not a big deal. You miss 2 days, not a big deal. You miss 1 week, big deal. You miss 1 month, tough to come back from generally. So I'm not asking you guys to lock in and do like 4 hours a day every day. And I'll explain what I do expect of you. But it's really important you realize like the common trend you get from students, no matter like what college they're in, what school they went to, did they do X, Y, or Z, they will have worked consistently over a long-ish period. And I say long-ish because remember, not everybody starts around about now. The best time to start for the HPAT generally is somewhere between August and Halloween, the year you're doing the HPAT. So, starting now is it's a fabulous time to start. It means you can get used to the exam, excuse me, you can get used to the exam before your mocks kick in and before your Christmas exams kick in and stuff like that. But also remember, like there are people who start in January who get it because they really supercharge their intensity. And I'll explain why somebody who starts in January could possibly get it in a moment. To be very clear, I pretty much would be very, very simple on this. You kind of need med entry. There are other options you can get, like ACE the HPAT is an example of another option. But my advice to students always is get med entry. Just get med entry. They have 3 packages. I generally suggest to get them. You guys can probably get either the first or the second one. You can have a look. The difference is the workshop. The workshop is good, but you guys have Grinds 360, like we're giving you workshops. So it's probably a lot of the same content, but you're more than happy, or you're more than welcome to use the workshop. I found that workshop very useful, and that kind of informs what I talk about now. It is annoying. I don't like that my advice to you guys is spend like €400 or €500. Unfortunately, I don't really have a better answer for you. It has happened in the past where I've had a student reach out to me and be like, I want to do well in the HPAT, but it's very dear. Would Grinds be cheaper? And I told that student, look, don't waste your time with Grinds. Like just whatever money you're going to spend on Grinds with me, just spend it on med entry. It is the best. They do know what they're doing very much. It's been my advice since I started teaching. Get med entry, okay? This got a couple quotes here to kind of summarize what I just said. Don't practice until you get it right. Practice until you never get it wrong. Kind of talks about that repetition and quality of study we talked about earlier. And we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act but a habit. You need to get in the habit of being excellent consistently. Okay? So we move on to our next slide, and you might notice it looks very different to everything else on these set of notes. So this is, you'll see this, lots of anatomical diagrams. When you get into first med, you'll spend most of your time in first year, or you spend a lot of time doing anatomy. So we have here, it's the upper body, of like pec major here, pec minor, just under it, you have the deltoids around the shoulder, traps around the back, and 2 heads of the biceps. Up here, that's all the anatomy of the upper body. What I want you guys to be thinking of is, what is the anatomy of a good HPAT student? Actually, scratch that. What is the anatomy of an excellent HPAT student? And then, what is the anatomy of their schedule? So in other words, like these people are not so much more intelligent than you are, okay? I will say there's a couple of people, like they're just insane, frankly. Like I have 2 friends who have a photographic memory, whatever, fine. I have done better than they have, like in medicine exams. So like, it's not like you're fighting uphill, you can't beat them. But you meet the odd person, fine, whatever. 1% of people might have photographic memories. The rest of the 99%, we're all the same. So what do you think it is that distinguishes them? What is the difference between somebody who is a good student and kind of maybe has a chance versus somebody who's not that good and doesn't have a chance? And the answer is, if you think about this in the context of like other skills you guys are very good at, it's easy to think that the key to be like absolutely excellent is to have brilliant control over the most complicated things. But generally speaking, excellence in literally any skill comes down to absolute control over basic concepts. So in other words, like, yes, the best footballers in the world can do all sorts of skill moves and skills and tricks, and they're better athletes than amateur footballers and so on and so forth. But they're also much better at very simple things, right? In other words, like knowing where everybody is on the pitch, their first touch is better, their perception of where everybody else on the pitch is, all much better. And so, yeah, they have all the other stuff. But being a better athlete than everybody doesn't really matter if your first touch is terrible in football. Or, being able to, cook something super complicated is great. But nobody learns to, let's say, make a souffle before they learn how to, make cupcakes or something. Okay? It is control over basics that you guys need to become really focused on, because I've used the analogy here of building bases. So you have to have a really solid level of like foundational information, really solid like fundamentals. And then on top of that, that's where you put more advanced stuff. That's where you put like advanced mapping, specific techniques, knowing things like 50-50 conduct or intensity matching, or, thinking about character and context in section 2. But the foundation to all that stuff is like reading the passage properly and knowing what the words mean. Okay, does that make sense? It doesn't matter how good you are at techniques in section 2. If you don't know what the words mean, it's mostly useless. Okay? And then there's the third part. And that third part, I'm running out of hands here, but that third part is, technically it's on the top, but really it feeds into everything. That's what brings it all together, because it doesn't matter how good you are, it matters how good you show the examiner you are. It's really an important distinction to make in your mind. It doesn't matter how good you do in your practice exams if you make a balls of the exam on the day. So that's why we focus so much on mentality and mindset and good self-talk and all this kind of stuff, because that's the stuff that really lends itself to performance on the day. And as I said, you get no marks for questions you get wrong. You get no marks for having good practice exams. The only exam that really matters is the one you do in February, on whatever, like the 12th of February or whatever it is. Okay, does that make sense? It's not easy, but it is simple. You'll be amazed how common it is, how often I see students working hard, basically wasting their time because their study is like incredibly inefficient. So I saw somebody say something like, have started since, X time, but haven't improved in a while, or haven't improved since September, or didn't improve from this month and now I've started improving, something like that. If you feel like that, but most of you will at some point over the next few months, just come back to this slide, pick one of these three things: build base, refine base, optimize mind. And just make sure, if you do nothing else for 1 hour, you are focusing on this stuff. The HPAT is a big, massive kind of, enormous topic. In any given moment, in any given day, you should be trying to attack a very small part of that, but attack it properly. And that way you can digest it into bite-sized pieces. There's a line or quote which is like, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is 1 bite at a time. How do you beat the HPAT? 1 step at a time. Okay? So a sample study routine is, there's a lot of variation in here. Again, I have to try and adhere to students who I might be watching today, and also students who may be watching 3 months from now. So I've given a range. It's 5 to 10 hours. You guys should be on the lower end of that, 5, 6, 7, because you've started early, or even if you haven't, you've started today, so you can maybe aim for the middle. That changes depending on how you space out your mid-entry exams. If you buy the mid-entry package, that comes with 10 exams. It comes with a load of practice questions and what they call a learn section, which is like a digital textbook of explanations. So space out the 10 mid-entry exams. Can somebody tell me in the chat, why doing the exams is so important? So I want you all to think about that for a second. Why is doing the exams so absolutely crucial? So can somebody put in, just think, why is doing practice exams so crucial for this test? Okay, so we have, I'm just going to read out a bunch in no particular order. To put yourself in exam setting, get used to the exam conditions, to know what to expect on exam day, indicates sheer focus during the period, timing. Somebody named, if their actual name is Rihanna, that is an excellent choice. Get used to the format, practice your timing, getting used to structure and timing, because the HPAT is also an exam. You're all correct. Basically, it's because, like, one of them is like because you can. Okay. Number two is because it's a skill based. It's a little bit easier for someone who's absolutely terrible to do a full mock exam because you can still, and because it's MCQ, like you can still attempt the questions. Whereas if I ask people on like September of fifth year, like here's a maths paper one, off you go, like you just wouldn't know what to do because it's not a multiple choice. So that's one big reason why it's a multiple choice exam. And then everything you guys have said, you're all correct basically. There was nothing I disagree with there. Timing, getting used to it, making it more effective, all that stuff extremely important. Okay, so space them out so that you get like value out of them evenly. Is that okay? You have to go through them. If we take a very simple baking analogy, if you are baking cookies, you do your best to follow a recipe. Okay, you then let the cookies bake. You take them out of the oven. When you get feedback on your cookies is when either somebody else eats them or you eat them. And when you eat them, you'll realize, like, okay, these are quite good. And you might think to yourself, they didn't taste this good last time. What did I do differently? Or you might realize, geez, this tastes horrible. What did I forget? And then you realize, oh, you didn't put any sugar in. Or they don't look the way they normally do. Did I forget whatever ingredient? This is essentially the way you need to be thinking about your exams. You need to be explaining to yourself why things have gone well or poorly so that you can do more of the stuff that made you do well and do less of the stuff that made things go poorly. Is that clear? Okay. If we continue on now, I'm going to give you guys a list of books I'd like you to read, or at least try and read, or consider reading. Atomic Habits is one of them. All of you want medicine. The fact that you want medicine will not be the reason you get in. The fact that you work well and properly and with good study systems and good study strategy, that's why you'll get in. That's basically what this quote is saying. So what a typical week may look like. This is really important. Basically, you have your practice exam. You do it on a Saturday. You retry the exam on a Sunday. This will make more sense next week, but basically you do an exam on mid-entry, there's like a retry button. I'd suggest the next day do it, okay? Then on Monday and Tuesday, you go through each section, okay? You can see here, I put Monday as 1 and 3 together, so about an hour going through section 1, maybe 30 or 40 minutes going through section 3. You can stretch this out. I've also given you a day off, so if you don't want a day off, you can kind of distribute it like that. The idea here is go through the sections you really need assistance with, see what went well. This is a little bit annoying for you guys right now because a lot of you may not have started. You have no clue where to start. That's okay. As you progress, this will become more and more important because then you need to, the later weeks is about going through specific areas that you're finding difficult or you haven't gone through yet. And if you're starting now, I would suggest maybe for the next week or next 10 days, every single day is like Thursday and Friday, i.e. you go through a specific area, let's say section 1, logical reasoning. You go to the learn section on mid-entry. I'll see, I should probably write this down if I can. Okay, it's not working again. Just one moment. No, it is now. Okay, so, what this involves is you use go to learn section. Go to learn section. Again, I know this makes very little sense if you don't have mid-entry, but if you do, it makes a lot of sense. So go to learn section, and I'm going to say spend, let's say maybe 20 minutes there. And then do a drill they're called. That's like practice questions. I'm going to say that's maybe 15 minutes or let's say 20 minutes. And then go through it. And I'm going to say that's also 15 minutes. Okay? And the idea here, guys, is very simple. That process of eating a cookie and realizing what's gone well, very important. You need to do that for every question you do in your drills. In your exams, you won't be able to go through every question. That's okay. It's really important you do not fuck this up, okay? The reason is if you do, you will feel the consequences of it very quickly. And what I mean by that is you will get really basic questions wrong and you won't know why, because the answer of why you're getting them wrong is because you're not doing basic stuff properly. If you've already done an exam or two, or you'll notice there's not 10 weeks until the exam, you can stretch out your exam. So maybe you do 3 every 4 weeks or 1 every 2 weeks or whatever. Just have a look at how many weeks are left till the exam and then come up with a plan. And you can stretch this timetable out over 2 weeks. So you can spend more time going through it. And let's say if you do an exam on Saturday, and we think of this as like a 2-week cycle, you can do your exam on Saturday. You can spend most of the week going through that exam slowly, and then spend most of the following week doing drills and learn section to prepare you and fill the gaps in your knowledge for that following exam. Make sense? This will be more relevant for most of you, frankly, when you start like studying properly, or at least start trying to adopt this strategy. I will say there are a few things that I'm absolutely certain work. This study schedule is one of them. Like, just do it, okay? Even if you don't like this, I'm happy if you guys want to freestyle a little bit here, but just having routine and consistency is so important. Because what often happens with students is if you wait too long, okay? So in other words, if you wait until November, December, you start putting yourself under a lot of stress, academic stress, to balance like your Christmas exams or your Halloween exams. But if you use now as a good starting point, it means you can get through a lot of work before Halloween or by Halloween. And it just eases up the pressure on you a little bit, okay? Don't forget common sense. You can change things around. As I said, a day off, not a big issue. If you miss a day, not a big issue. You miss multiple days, not great. As I said, the earlier you start, the more you can space out your exams. There's 10 mid-entry exams. I'm going to talk about the ACER material. Somebody asked, I think I've already answered the question of like, do I need mid-entry? Yes. ACER exams, I'm not going to write it now because it's a little bit premature, but they have like 4 practice exams. Exams 2, 3, and 4 for ACER are quite good. I'd suggest you do them. Unfortunately, again, I've just told you to spend more money. I appreciate not exactly the most nice advice, but they are good, and I suggest students do them. So that would mean if you did get them, I think they're like 20 something euro each. It means that you now have 13 exams and you can spread them out kind of evenly between now and the exam. So I'm kind of skipping a big step, which is none of you are used to going through questions. How on earth do you actually do that? Okay, so it's an excellent question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and show you. Now, there's a very small chance that this cuts off in 9 minutes. I don't think it should, but I will confirm for a second if it does. While I'm doing that, though, there's a question that's about to come up here. You can, if you want, like the notes are in the chat. You can open it up on this, but I'll open it up here. It's coming here on the next slide. And I want you guys to do it. I'll give you about 90 seconds. In the actual exam, you'll have like 86 or something. So basically the same. And I want you to do your best. When you finish, just put your answer in the chat. Is that clear? Okay. So what I'm going to tell you guys now is your time starts now. Off you go. It's this question here in a study. Okay, so that's I've gone a little bit over. Can somebody just confirm again for me that you guys can hear me very quickly? Just one person, just say yes or something. Okay, while you guys were doing that, yeah, you guys can hear me, right? Can someone please confirm that for me? Okay, so I'm just having a look at the answers here. It's kind of funny. I wonder, does the fact that you guys can see everybody else, how does that affect your answers? I don't know. Now, I'm going to tell you, you're supposed to get this. You're supposed to get this question wrong. This is really the only time I'm like intentionally a dickhead in these classes, okay? And it is. I've done this kind of every time. This question is supposed to be hard, okay? And you're not supposed to get it right. If I were in person, what I'd get you to do is I'd get you to put your hands up, and then the guys who get it right, I'd ask you how many of you are confident you're correct. Most of the hands go down, and then we kind of realize the only people who get this right, generally speaking, maybe 10 to 15% of the room will get it right, and of those, maybe only half of them actually know that they're correct. The rest are just guessing or blindly guessing, because there's a difference between guessing and educated guess. So here are a couple of things that may have happened, okay? Again, you're going to have to pardon my French here. So you read the STEM, you read the question, you read the answers, and then one absolutely unavoidable thought gets into your head, and that is, what the fuck have I just read? Or, what do any of these things have to do with each other? Or, okay, what do you want me to do with this information? Some combination of those things, right? If you felt any of that, can you please just say yes, or can you say that, yo, that sounds familiar, or something like that into the chat? Can you put that in for me? So if you read this question and were like, okay, how am I supposed to do any of it? Okay. I can tell you that the correct answer is not A, which seems very common or very popular in the chat function, okay? It seems like D. Well, not seems like, D is the correct answer, okay? So anybody who got D, well done, or sort of well done, okay? Again, I don't really care if you got this right, and it's not really an indication of anything if you got D, unless you got it for the perfect reasons. What I want to show you is, all I really want to take you on is maybe like a 7 or 8 minute journey, over the course of which I want it to be clear to you that you can go from, oh my God, how is anyone supposed to make sense of this question, to, do you know what, I understand it now. And now I have a strategy or 2 or 3 that will help me attack another question that is similar, right? Again, we stick to our baking analogy, i.e., I've just bit into my cookie, I realize it's not great. What do I need to change to my recipe so that the next time I bake, i.e., the next time you do a section 1 question, I can make sure I follow the right amended recipe, okay? For the record, I used to do this with football analogies, but I found more people understand baking than they do football, so that's why I've gone with baking. I'm actually a complete baking novice myself. But let's skip ahead to this, okay? So if you see this question, we'll start off with the question. I'm going to give you guys a bullet point list of things I expect you to do every time you do a section 1 question. That's coming next week, so we're not going to talk about that too much. But very quickly, I'm going to spoil it. The order you should do every section 1 question is, you should read the question, then you should read the answers, then you should read the STEM, then you should read the question, then you should read the answers, okay? So essentially, you should start off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 is basically figure it out, okay? Read the question first, then read the answers, then read the STEM, read the question again, then read the answers again, then off you go, okay? If you read the question, which of the following is closest to the percentage of participating parents that correctly identified the psychological well-being of their children? 18, 32, 46, 86. Okay. In a study, 1,000 teenage children and their parents were interviewed regarding their children's psychological well-being. The results showed that in 5% of cases, the parents believed that their child was depressed. Okay, so in 5% of cases, the parents believed their child was depressed. Okay. However, when the children were interviewed, 12% reported that they were depressed. Okay, so in 5% of cases, the parents thought their child was depressed, but 12% of the time, So in 5% of cases, the parents believed their child was depressed, but when the children were asked, 12% reported they were depressed. Further, of the teenagers who reported being depressed, 85% were not identified as depressed by the parents. Okay. Which of the following is closest to the percentage of participating parents that correctly identify the psychological well-being of their children? 18, 32, 46, 86. And now I'm stuck. What does any of this information have to do with themselves? What to do with this? So, is this a logical reasoning question? Yeah. Is it a section 1 question? Yeah. Are they testing logical reasoning? Well, kind of. Really, in this case, they're testing critical thinking. They're testing time management because you can feel the time slipping away. Okay, I gave you like 10 extra seconds just to allow for any like online, delay in you seeing the question or me seeing your answers, that type of thing. But really what they're seeing is, okay, this is the question, these are the answers, one of these 4 have to be correct. So they expect you to figure out that either for the purposes of this question, somebody is either depressed or not depressed. That's essentially what they say, okay? So they say that, believe their child was depressed, and then it's basically not identified as depressed. So it's either depressed or not depressed. That's essentially like the qualifiers. Now, we talked before about this is not a memory exam. So it is true that about 4 in 1,000 people will have schizophrenia. That is irrelevant to this question. You're not expected to know that. The only reason I know it is because I'm doing psychiatry at the moment in college. But so you're not supposed to bring that in and think, oh my God, what about those people? Like, how does this question account for that? They don't expect you to do that. They just want you to take this question as fact. They just want you to take whatever's going on here as like the only set of rules that matter. And then you do here. So now you realize there's only 2 options, okay? Either somebody is depressed or not depressed, okay? So they're either depressed or they're not depressed, okay? And now I want you to think, okay, they say that in 5% of cases, the parents believe that their child was depressed. So what hidden rule is in there? Well, we have a bit of time. I've got confirmation this will go till 2, so I'm not worried about getting kicked off. Can somebody tell me what hidden rule is there from this line? So they've said that in 5% of cases, the parents believe their child was depressed. What bit of information have they told us without telling us? Can somebody come up with it? Perhaps somebody who figured out the answer was D. Any ideas? I'll wait for you guys to think about this for a moment or two. If you can still hear me, that is, which I presume you can. Any ideas? I'll give you guys a minute. Okay, so what they have said, oh yes, somebody said it. 5% identify the psychological well-being. That is correct. Except D, 50 kids. Okay, Mr. J, well done. Or Miss J. 95% said not depressed. That's what they're saying. So there's a hidden rule here. This result showed that in 5% of cases, the parents believed that their child was depressed. You can assume, therefore, that in 95% of cases, the parents believed their child was not depressed. Okay? So 95% not depressed. Yeah? I don't know why this is not being very nice to me. Hopefully it cops on. And then you can use the same logic for the next sentence here. So 12% reported that they were depressed. So that means that 88% reported they were not depressed. Yeah? Now, this is getting a bit messy. It's fine. My goal here is not actually to show you guys any sort of maths. Have a look at the answers for a second and tell me, what do you notice? Right? So what you'll notice is 18, 32, 46, 86. Can you notice one is way far apart from the others, right? 18, 32, 46 are all 14% apart. They're also all under 50. But have a look at this, right? If you just go off of these 2 lines and these 2 hidden rules, you basically have parents believe that 95% of the parents believe that their kid is not depressed. And 88% of the kids, are not depressed. So we have 95% of the parents think that their child is not depressed, and 88% of the children have said that they are not depressed. So if you just had to ballpark guess, based literally just off that information, forget even about the third bit of information. Now it's helpful, but it's not relevant. Think just in the context of the following, right? We'll go with, shirt sizes. Small, medium, large. Will the answer be large? Will the percent of people who correctly identify the well-being of their children, will that number be small, medium, or large? If we know that 95% of parents said their child was not depressed, And we know that 88% of children are actually not depressed. Then is the number of parents who correctly identify the psychological well-being of their children, is the number of parents who correctly identify the psychological well-being of their children, is that number small, medium, or large? And then you'll start to realize, what do we think? Can someone say something? What do we think? Small, medium, or large? What do we reckon? So what you'll end up coming up with is, I don't really know what numbers are, but there's loads of people, okay? There's loads of people who think their children are not depressed, and there are lots of children who are in fact not depressed. So the actual number doesn't even matter to me, because if 95% of the parents think they're not depressed, and 88% of the kids actually are not depressed, well, that number is going to be high. And look, only one of the answers is above 50. So at this point, you can safely pick D. Now, yes, you can go into further detail. It's not the goal of today. You can go into further detail and say, like, of the teenagers who were depressed, 85% were not identified as depressed by their parents. In other words, like, the parents really don't have a good idea on, the parents do not realize that the children are depressed. And you can further narrow that down, right? You can go and I'm not going to do it today. The reason I'm not going to give it to you is, like, you can just put this into ChatGPT and he'll give it to you for free, and it'll be probably better explained than I can. You can put everybody in different like buckets, you know. You can draw, it might not come across very clearly here, but you can essentially on your sheet of rough paper, you can basically just kind of put people, like, you know, I'm just going to say depressed and not depressed. And then you can go, you know, correctly identified, incorrectly identified, you know, correctly identified, incorrectly identified, correctly identified, incorrectly identified, and so on. You don't even have to bother with any of that stuff, because you can literally just go small, medium, large. Now, there's lots of stuff you can learn from this, but now, I hope, it's been about 8 minutes, I hope you can start to think, okay, this question made no sense to me 8 minutes ago. And now at least I have a strategy for attacking this question, right? Which is, okay, I need to think about, what is the hidden rule? Could there be hidden rules in these questions? Well, the answer is yes. There can be a hidden rule. Also, I need to realize, look, this is an MCQ exam. An MCQ exam means that the answer's in front of me, right? That means that I don't always have to try and invent the answer. In other words, I don't have to go perfectly from the start of the problem to the end of the problem. I can actually just go, just kind of clean. I can skip steps. I can do trial and error. I can also see, if we have a look at the question, we're going to talk a lot next week about how important the question is. The question says, and I think somebody said it into the chat function there. The question says, which of the following is closest to the percentage? So when I see closest in the question, straight away I'm thinking, like, the question has just told me to estimate. The question doesn't expect me to come up with an exact number. Now you can, right? And you'll get, I think it's like 866 you get, or something like that. But you don't have to. So when you read closest, remember I told you the first thing you need to read is the question. This is why, because when you read the question first, you pick up on closest. You pick up on percentage of participating parents. So in other words, I need to know what the parents are thinking. And I need to know what the psychological well-being of their children, not random children, but I need to be aware of, you know, the psychological well-being of their children. So now I have this in mind. I know what I'm looking for, and I notice, geez, the numbers are pretty close together, and then there's one randomly on its own. And then I read through the stem, and I look for the hidden rules, and now I have a way of getting this answer correctly, being pretty confident, and being able to stay within the 90 seconds. And if you guys think back to about 10 minutes ago, a lot of you may have felt this question is impossible. How could I possibly get this question right? Okay, would that be a fair statement, do you guys think? Would it be reasonable for me to say that? That 10 minutes ago, this feels really hard. But now, after going through it, you can get a better sense of what's going on, okay? And now, if a question like this comes up again, the next time you see it, the next time you see any section 1 question, you now know, right, read the question first, read the answers, pick up on keywords. pick up on keywords, right? Pick up on how the answers might be related to each other, or what little breadcrumbs are they leaving for me in the answers that will help me figure out what's important and what's not important. Now I know that I'm skipping over a lot of like how to read the stem. We're going to talk about that next week. But now I know, okay, when there's a rule that's given, I can also think about, is there a hidden rule given? I also need to keep in mind, you may have noticed I repeated myself when I was reading the stem the first time. That's not accidental. How do I know? You basically need to repeat stuff when things are important. How do you know they're important? The question will tell you. And this is the process of improvement that I'm talking about with your HPAT. This is the stuff that is central to your ability to improve. Your ability to do this properly is what determines whether you'll get in or not. And people who start at Christmas, in January, really late, their ability to do this, they are like so supercharged on stress and intensity, basically, that is why somebody who starts late, even though they might only do 6 or 10 weeks of preparation, they're so tuned into this because like they just have to be, that's how they improve so much. Yes, maybe they are naturally a little bit better, but typically speaking, it's because they're really good at this. Okay. And if you adopt approach like this, I have this big massive box here. It'll become more important as we progress through these weeks. But what often I found helpful is it's kind of hard to come up with, like, when you're doing it on your own, it's hard to figure out what to think about. So what I like doing is just ask yourself questions, basically. So for instance, after going through questions, we've just gone through a question, okay? What have I just learned? So you guys should have an answer to that. How will I apply this information in the future? Well, make sure you use the strategies we talked about. Make sure you follow that basic outline, which you'll find out more about next week. Have I ever identified these problems before? Well, probably some of you may have. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Doesn't really, not applicable today because it's your first day. If we think about this in the context of if this was an exam, there's somebody who asked, and I won't have time to go through it, and to be quite frank, there's other perhaps more important questions I'll answer in the next 20 minutes. How well did I really understand this question? So even if I got it right, did I get it right for the correct reasons? Because if I didn't, maybe I still need to go through this properly. So you need to go through questions even if you get them right or wrong. Because does it really matter if you got this question right? Well, a little bit, because you want to do well. But really, what's really important is that your process is solid, because your process is the thing that will decide whether you get the next one right. Maybe you got this one correct based on luck. Next time, it needs to be skill. Because if you hold yourself to this kind of high standard and you sharpen your process up this much, I guarantee you will see results. It is 100%. It will happen. So if you use these questions, I just like the questions because they force you to think along the right lines. You don't have to use this stuff. If you feel lost about an exam you've done or questions you've done or drills, whatever, I find that the questions are a really good place to start. And then you can narrow down depending on what you find helpful and not helpful. To start off though, if you do an exam and you think, well, the obvious one is like, how well did I do last time? Did I do anything different this exam compared to last week that helped me do better or worse? Was there something that happened this week that didn't happen last week? Okay. And you kind of constantly build and build and build and build. And the way I described it is like you kind of are snowballing yourself. Okay. You just want to imagine yourself like you're starting off as a tiny little snowball here on the 20th of September. And as you're going downhill, you're picking up more and more and more and more snow. And then the exam is somewhere down the bottom. So you want to just, as you slide and as you kind of get closer to the exam, you're just picking up more and more techniques. And that's really important. It's really, really important. But do not forget, all the techniques in the world are super great, absolutely fantastic. They're pointless if you don't get the basics right. I.e., the basics of just read the question first, then read the answers, then read the stem, then read the question, then read the answers. So that's kind of what I wanted to show you today about, we've kind of now accomplished, we've talked to kind of all this stuff. What have you learned from going through this question? How can this help you get future questions correct? And the one thing I just want to show you, do you really need to understand everything that's going on in this question to get it right? Not really. You can, but I'm sure there's probably one person on the call on the stream at the moment who did all of the maths, probably. and got it. There's usually one person in every room I've ever done this with. But you don't have to do that. And that guy or girl may actually have spent more time than they have available to them, which technically is not great because it's only one question. So always think you don't have to understand everything to get stuff correct. If your method is solid, you can strategically skip steps. But accidentally skipping steps is not a strategy you can rely on. Okay.